My guest today is Trent Smith. Trent is the executive director of the Franklinton Board of Trade. Now, I live in Franklinton, and when I first moved here, I wanted to get involved in the community. More or less, I wanted to get my business involved in the community. So, Trent's name appeared on my LinkedIn one day. I shot him a message. He invited me out to Land Grant Brewery to have a beer or two. What was supposed to be a 15 to 30-minute conversation about how my business could sign up for the Board of Trade ended up being a nearly 2-hour conversation about Franklinton and community, which is why I think he's a great first guest for this podcast series. The community itself seems to be balancing a historic past with a really unique present, but a rapidly developing and quickly approaching future. We're going to talk about all that and more on this chronicle of the Columbus Chronicle. When you hear about where we were and the history of Franklinton, it makes this community so much more, I feel. I don't know. I'm just a big fan of this area.
Well, and it's interesting because just yesterday, Jared Smalley, who was a reporter, I think he started off as a sports reporter for Channel 4, but now he does some anchoring duties, I think, on a morning show or whatever. Anyway, he's gotten more, I guess, into investigative reporting, and so he is doing a series. It's going to be a 3-part series that will be like short videos, like 2.5-minute videos. About Franklinton,
Which is still long for TV,
which is still kind of long for a TV thing, but then they're going to do like a full half-hour kind of special. I think that's going to air next week. So kind of, getting back to what you're talking about, there's a lot of attention on it right now. But to back all the way up and talk about how I got down here in the first place, I used to be in banking for 18 years before I started this gig. And I spent the last 12 years of that banking career in retail management. And I was working for WestBanco in Gahanna, and they have their headquarters in Wheeling, West Virginia. So no one really was super familiar with the area. And so it was one of those situations where they put me in charge of community development outreach for the Columbus region. A, because they didn't understand the area and they thought that I would know that better, and B, no one else wanted to do it. So it was just one of those tasks that everybody looked at as like, I just don't have time. What ended up happening to me is I ended up loving that task. I ended up loving that role way more than my normal job responsibilities. And so what that allowed me to do was first of all, I didn't know what that meant to be the community development or the community outreach coordinator for the area. So I called other colleagues at banks, and I called some folks in Wheeling, and I said, well, what does that exactly mean? So, I needed to find a neighborhood, low income census tracts, impoverished, underserved, just challenges in every way you can think of. That was the type of neighborhood I was looking for to start a relationship. And so I found Franklinton, and I came down and met Larry Dandoran, who was the executive director, or actually president CEO of Gladden Community House at the time. And I showed up with a check for $1,000, and I said, hey, I'm in charge of this responsibility now for WestBanco. I want to start this relationship. Here's a check for $1,000 to do with whatever you want.
Yeah.
In lieu of more money, how else could I help? And so, he had this, laundry list of things that, like, oh, wow, we could do this and that and everything else. And I found out that even though there was a PNC, well, at the time it was National City here, and there was a Huntington for a long time that's now closed on Mound Street, they really didn't have banking partners that were sort of like participating. Like maybe they were writing checks, but they weren't like actually getting involved in the neighborhood, doing financial literacy counseling, joining boards of directors, things of those natures. And so that's what I jumped into. That's what I embraced. And I got into financial literacy counseling, talking to students about savings accounts. I was on the board of directors at Habitat for Humanity at the time. So we would do, like, if somebody got declined for a Habitat mortgage, we would come in and say, well, here's what happened, here's why, and here's how you could fix it in the next 2 or 3 years. So we did a lot of that kind of stuff. And then I joined the board of directors for the Franklinton Development Association under the leadership of Jim Sweeney, which is a well-known figure for the community. And so fast forward, that was in about 2005 when all that started. Fast forward to November of 2009, the mortgage meltdown crisis was in full blast, atomic mode, and banks all over, not just West Banco, everybody was, moving people around, laying people off, taking away, you can't use discretionary decision making anymore, all those types of things. And so the long and short of it is I had a chance to leave the bank with a severance package that would keep me afloat for probably 4 or 5 months. And I was like, hey, it's Columbus, Ohio. I'll find something.
Yeah.
This is not the end of the world. So my last week at the bank, I was spending time calling all of the different nonprofits that I had developed relationships with here, Gladden, the Boys and Girls Club. And I called Jim at Franklinton Development Association. I explained what happened. I didn't badmouth the bank. I just said, this is what's happening. I won't be in my position. I don't know if they're going to replace this position with anybody else, if this is going to continue, if you'll have a board representative or more donations. I just don't know. And he thanked me. And then he said, so what are you going to do? And I said, well, I don't know yet. I've got some time. I don't know yet. And he said, well, we just got approved for a grant to hire somebody to do economic development work on West Broad Street. He said, you want to come and do that? And, it was just one of those moments in my life where I was like, yeah, I do. And so I left the bank, all of the comforts of corporate world, 401k, vacation, seniority, all those types of things. And I came to this little teeny nonprofit situation that had a rickety little budget and all that kind of stuff. And so then, fast forward, here we are 15 years later.
Yeah, and not small, not a little freaky dink.
And it's not the rickety organization that it began with. It's really grown, and not just because of me. A lot of factors and a lot of partnerships that helped make that so. Franklinton's blessed with a lot of nonprofits that all work in slightly different lanes, but we know when to cross over lanes and help each other out. And there's not a lot of competition in that regard. Not a lot of neighborhoods can say that, but we really do have that vibe here in the neighborhood.
Yeah, I've also noticed, I think what goes to Franklinton, and I'm biased living here as a RU, but there's a real sense of community that's, I feel, harder to get when you live, Franklinton is right next to the downtown street. Franklinton is downtown in my mind, in that area. You don't get a sense of community in a lot of places, I feel, or, it's my opinion. Franklin has I know my neighbors, I get to know everyone around here. I feel like there's a really strong community here.
That is absolutely true. The first house I ever bought was in 2002. It was in Pickerington, a nice little suburb. It was very nice, but it took me, I don't know, the better part of a month and a half to really meet all of my immediately adjacent neighbors. I moved into Franklinton in February of 2013. I knew everybody on my street that week. And because they were all curious, like, wow, somebody's moving in, like, who are you? And so it was just really a different and, really refreshing, way to, move into a neighborhood. And I knew there were challenges. I can't say that I wasn't nervous a little bit when I first moved to the neighborhood. Where I originally moved into renting a house was on Hayden Avenue, just like 5 or 6 houses in from Broad Street, and that's far west in the neighborhood. That was at that time, it still is a little bit, but not nearly as bad. But at that time, that was a pretty challenged little stretch. But it was one of those things where I woke up the first morning I woke up there. Nothing happened. My car was still out front. No one tried to break in. All those types. All the things that you could imagine. And then the next day, and I thought, you know what? This is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
This is absolutely fine.
Yeah, it was the same way. I remember when we moved here, when we were looking for a home, my wife and I, we had we've given our realtor a bunch of areas we were thinking of living. Franklinton was not on that list of places we were thinking of living. And then one day we were scrolling through one of the sites that has all the houses, like Redfin or something, and saw the home we live in now. We said, "Oh, this is pretty. We'll check it out." We came by, we loved it. But I remember that first night I stayed here alone, when we were moving in. I slept on an air mattress in the living room,
Yeah.
and I remember the whole time I'm going, "All right, just, I have this next I get what do I grab if someone breaks it?" Like, but and then, yeah, the next morning came, and it's just you realize, like, "Oh, this is all a lot of this is, in my head, of what's
Yeah,
happening."
I agree with that, and, I never shy away from the challenges that we still experience here, because and I know that you understand that. I always tell people, you just gotta pay attention to what's around you. You just gotta kinda and it's important to meet your neighbors. It's important to do all those things, and and Franklinton makes that easy to do because they wanna meet you too. Um, and just giving that back and forth, I'll watch your house if you watch mine, that kinda thing. I think that's what makes this neighborhood strong, and the random crime that does happen, I mean, that happens everywhere. I mean, windows get broken out of cars in Westerville and New Albany as well. So it's not like that's a unique issue to our neighborhood. Maybe we see a slightly higher frequency of it, but, you know, you gotta move here with the right set of expectations in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I wanna get into opportunities, but I do wanna I think it's important to just not just go, "Everything's great," like you were saying.
Right.
What do you think some of the areas now where there are those challenges here and still in the community, or things that you hear, working with the Board of Trade,
Yeah.
from the people who live around here?
I think the 2 major things I can point to would be just, um well, actually, there's 3. Uh, the existence of human trafficking is real and present and prevalent in this neighborhood. It is also on the hilltop. It is also in other areas. But Sullivan Avenue and Broad Street, just this general area. It it it's a situation where there is so much demand that shows up here, that there is just that much supply. And, and what I try to tell people is that those are not prostitutes, those are not hookers, those are not ladies of the night, those are human trafficking victims is what they are. And nothing will make me believe otherwise. Um, Whether they choose the lifestyle or not is debatable, but something made them choose that lifestyle. And so therefore I still consider them a human trafficking victim in a lot of respects. So that's one. Homelessness is another one. But I try to let people understand that, or help people understand that, we have a ton of railroad tracks in this neighborhood. We are on the number 10 bus line on a major corridor, which is easy. It goes back and forth whether it's the first or second busiest bus line in Columbus. I believe that's still true. And then we have a lot of services in the neighborhood. So the homeless population is not going anywhere anytime soon. The thing I try to encourage and advocate for is how do we become better neighbors to each other? Helping the homeless people understand that, the reason I don't want you here is because you're causing a significant problem for that business right there that you're in front of. That's the reason. I'm not telling you you have to go out of the neighborhood. I'm not trying to like remove you from
Yeah.
existence. I'm just telling you this is a problem and I'd like you to just, find another spot.
And there's also resources
And there's
that you
also
could go
and there are
connecting them to that,
resources that
yeah.
we can refer them to. So that's the way we deal with that. And then if there's resistance or if there's other problems that are coming up, like if it's drug use or there's an open fire or something like that, then we have to take other steps.
Right.
But there's a compassionate side to us trying to deal with that problem.
And there's levels to it.
And there's many levels to it. And then I would say the third most prevalent problem in the neighborhood would be, just trash, illegal dumping, and particularly like illegally dumped tires. We are, you have an alley just like I do,
I've
and you
experienced
you
the
you
oil
find
pans
tires
in the
you
alley.
find tires in your alley. Yes. So it's a real thing. We try to address it as best we can. I know that the city of Columbus, the refuse division, the solid waste inspectors, they do a sometimes a thankless job trying to combat that. It's hard. It's hard. You gotta get a good ID. You gotta get a license plate number. There's so many things that you have to actually make a difference, and those are hard to come by. So yeah. So the short answer to your question, those 3 main challenges that I see today would be human trafficking, the homeless factor, and then trash, illegal dumping.
Yeah, and it does seem what is nice is it seems for all of those, there is an increase in resources the city is putting out. Because I see those posts about, "Hey, tire collection day, come to this," which is so, it's not that there is an ignorance to it. There is an active pursuit to try to, I don't wanna say fix, but improve that situation.
Absolutely true. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's not that we're shunning the problem or acting like it doesn't exist. It's like,
Yeah.
no, we know it's there, and I understand that we have to deal with it, but it's just a matter of finding the resources to come at it with. The city does a good job, but then the Board of Trade, through just our efforts and then the supplemented efforts of the Franklinton Special Improvement District. And I know we're going to talk about more about those two entities. Um, they also come at that problem from more of a grassroots perspective. Um, we do have a relationship with the city where we can work with them to remove tires, call on them to, if we find a big bunch somewhere, and we work to just collect them ourselves. And then when there is a tire amnesty day or something like that, then we can get those taken care of. So it's I think that's the problem, that people look at me the most with, like, with their head cocked, going, "Really, you have that kind of?" You're like, "Oh yeah, yeah, it's real." you know, business. These some of these small mom and pop tire shops, they either don't want to, or they literally can't afford to pay, the 5 or 7 or $8 a tire it requires to, like, have them picked up and disposed of properly. So they'll load up, 50 tires in a guy's, pickup truck, give him a $20 bill and say, "Just
Thanks for
go get rid of these." And they do. And I understand why they do it, but it's a problem to deal with, and we're ready to do that.
You told me a lot about what the Board of Trade does, and I had no idea it was so expansive. Kinda talk to me, for those who maybe don't know, what is the Board of Trade, the Franklinton Board of Trade? And I'd love to know about some of the things you guys are doing here.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate the question. So the Board of Trade, just to give a kind of an explanation of the name, back in the day, chambers of commerces were called boards of trade. Um, and I would believe that mainly was due that a lot of those members, those business people, they were tradesmen. So they were blacksmiths, and they were, cobblers, and they were all those types of things. And so they were boards of trade. I don't know when that official transition took place for Chamber of Commerce, but the Board of Trade name always remained for our organization. Um, it was started in March 2nd of 1904, and it was the businessmen and women in Franklinton who wanted unfettered, no delay access to downtown Columbus. The reason they had delays is that the railroad tracks that are elevated today, that are you know next to the Gravity Project, through East Franklinton, where the old spaghetti warehouse used to be, the old T&O Railroad Station that's now Station 67 for the Firefighters Union. Those used to be at grade level.
Whoa,
So it
sounds like a nightmare.
Oh yeah. So depending on how long the train was or how slow it was moving, you could wait a long time to get downtown. So they said, "Well, look, we would like to have those elevated." I can't even imagine the monumental undertaking that must have been to get the railroads, the Fed, the state, the county, the city, locals, local organizations, all to support and get that done. But that's what they did. That was started in, like I said, 1904, 1911. They got it done. They had this big celebration. I'll have to bring by a copy of the program that I have from that event that shows, like, the menu and some of the agenda stuff and some of the comments from it. It's pretty entertaining to read. Um, but then they decided, well, we were formed around a project, so what do we do now? And they said, well, let's just remain in place as an advocacy group. And what I love about it is, in that 1911 um, program for that celebration event, they say in there that they want to exist to benefit and help and advocate for not just the business community, but everybody. So the residents, just the community in general. And that was a different bent from a traditional chamber of commerce. And so I didn't see that program or read that until years later after I had already been doing this job. And I was like, wow, okay. So I really feel good about the fact that the things we do today are exactly what they intended in 1911.
Focusing on it.
I just didn't know it. So serendipity must have been playing a role there somehow, that they know everything was just coming together the way it ought to. Um, so our goal, or our mission, is advocate, beautify, connect. Those are our 3 buckets of focus. It's the ABCs of the Board of Trade. And what that means is, advocacy is really sort of the more chambery, traditional chambery types of programs. Networking, going to talk to the mayor, going to talk to city council, making businesses aware of programs through the city, county, or any other entity that would be a grant or a low interest rate loan or something like that. um, uh, you know, Programs of that nature that really are a specific and focused business interest. Um, Beautify is the reason that we are a 501(c)(3) instead of a 501(c)(6) like a normal chamber would be. The C3, makes us a charitable nonprofit. It means that we can write grants, and like, to the Ohio EPA, to the Columbus Foundation, to the United Way, things of, groups like that that allow us to support, litter pickups and community beautification days and landscaping efforts, and, just things of that nature that aesthetically improve the neighborhood. We work with congregations, schools, other nonprofits, civic groups, all the above, and businesses and all the above. And then the connect is, that's really about the idea that what I realized kind of, a couple years into the job, is that I was typically the first guy, or one of the first guys at least, getting a phone call if somebody had a question about Franklinton. And about half the time I have the answer that they need or want. The other half of the time I'm like, well, I don't know that answer, but I know who does. And so that just made, I was like, okay, so we're almost like the switchboard for Franklinton in a lot of ways. And so that's, we went through this process to figure out, like, what is it we do? How can we be more concise with saying that? And so that's where we came up with Advocate, Beautify, Connect. Um, the beautification effort turned into the Franklinton Special Improvement District program, which then is a separate entity that we manage, that provides more focused full-time cleaning and safety services throughout the business corridor. So that's really in general what we do. We're all about just whatever it is we can do to bend backwards to make the community better or to serve a need, we'll do it. And that's everything from advocating at city council, all the way down to cutting the lawn of the little old lady on Cypress Avenue because her son-in-law hurt himself and he can't do it for her right now.
Having a beer with a curious resident, yeah.
Having a beer with a curious resident. I love it. I mean, I love the role that I get to play, and it's really, I get to do this. I mean, it really, that's the way I feel about this job. And just having the opportunity to really sort of immerse myself into a neighborhood and truly drop a really heavy anchor in this community is something I'm super proud of, and I encourage other people to consider it.
Love all of that. You touched on the history with, the Board of Trade, and I think one of the really unique things about Franklinton is the history here. Obviously, the first settlement, in the area, but then, bigger than that, I think the history is just so rich with the ups and downs, right? Because you had, the first area that was settled, but then you have massive flooding that drives out that, I would say, and, I'm not a history buff, I just love history. It seems like a lot of those issues were what caused some of the issues that are still prevalent here in the community now that we talked about earlier, was the fact that this area had been, in an economically was very economically depressed due to the fact that there was no flood wall, so it was very difficult to bring businesses here, but that's the whole story. But I'd love if you could talk to kind of the history of this community.
Yeah, I would say that the neighborhood is really experienced at stops and starts in development and progress. We've often had, 2 steps forward and 3 steps back, during my time here. But yeah, so Lucas Sullivan founded the area in 1797. found out that, wow, you could really grow just about anything here. The soil was awesome. Well, the reason that was so awesome is because we had a lot of flooding, and all that silt from the river beds, would come up and enrich the soil. So, there was a silver lining to the flooding, but, the flooding, was the main problem. So, yeah, three major floods: 1898, 1913, and 1959. The 1913 flood was what they call a 1,000-year flood. Obviously meaning that, a flood that bad should only occur about once in 1,000 years. Well, the 1959 flood was a 500-year flood. So, and it was in many ways equally as devastating as the 13 flood, but just, didn't quite, reach that, I guess, like tornado scales. And so with those two floods, though, after the 59 flood, things really started getting into a decayed situation. And so then what happened is, in about the early 80s, I'm not clear on like what date this actually happened, but FEMA um, designated Franklinton as a 100-year floodplain community. And so what that ended up meaning in real time, when that decision was made, is that you simply were not allowed to build new unless you had it elevated to a point where you would be immune from the floods, which would be like incredibly expensive. Um, or and you could not renovate a structure if the cost of the renovation was going to exceed 50% of the value. Well, some of these structures had been through uh, 2 floods for sure, maybe 3 floods. Um, and so when you looked at the value that they had at the time, man, if you wanted to put on a new roof and new windows, you were probably getting real close to 50% of the value. So in a lot of ways, the neighborhood was just frozen in time for like 25, 30 years. Um, so then in like the late 80s, early 90s, conversations started happening around a flood wall. And that was Congresswoman Deborah Price, who was really the federal person that really pushed that through, and worked with the neighborhood. But again, just like raising the railroad tracks. I mean, a massive undertaking.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to build a wall around an entire neighborhood. So the Army Corps of Engineers actually built it. But it's cool to point out that Burgess and Nyepel, who is a supporter of the Board of Trade, and they actually have their new headquarters now in a building on the peninsula, which is in Franklinton. They were one of the design companies that actually figured out what the wall needed to be. Yeah. So that all got built. That dedication happened in 2004. And I think there was a lot of expectation that, wow, okay, so by 2005, we're going to see some, real things happening here. And that was pie in the sky thinking, and I understand why they would have thought that. But what was realized is that the decay had been so severe that no one was really interested, even with the flood wall, of coming down here and dropping real money on, new builds or renovations. A couple of examples of what I'm talking about with the need to elevate if you want to renovate or build new. So the library on Town Street,
Yeah.
the way that's designed seems kind of funky. Well, it's funky because of that restriction. They had to build that entranceway so that it was really just kind of like a a a, uh, um, a vestibule, and then you had to walk upstairs to actually get to the library. Otherwise, that should have been, you just walk into the library.
It's so funny you mentioned that. I talked with Ben Zadinsky from the library yesterday, and he said each branch is built specifically to the community, and he goes, both in the sense of, like, what the community needs, but, like, specific to what that community looks like. It's a great example of that. But sorry,
Yeah.
I just had to interject with that.
No, absolutely. And then the other example would be Gladden Community House. The backside of their building, when they did some renovations and expansion, um, there's what we would consider a lot of wasted space there because they couldn't make it occupiable space. So they had to elevate it, and they park cars under there, which is great, but I mean, it could also be better space. So those are 2 examples of, like, I guess, compromises that had to get made.
To build any
Extra money that had to be spent just to do anything that would improve the area or improve an organization or and their building. So, so fast forwarding now, we've got the 2004 dedication. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. Well, then Lance Robbins, who was a developer out of Los Angeles, California, that passed away a few years ago, he purchased the 400 West Rich Street property, and that has become what it is today with as an art center. I think there's probably about 180 different individual art studios in there today, and he bought that and just sat on it for a while. And I think he got a bad rap because people thought, oh, he's just going to hold on to that and then just sell it, when the price is right. Well, what he did is he held on to it until he realized that there was an appetite for people to want to be here, and then that's when that art movement came into play. And then you fast forward a couple more years, and Mayor Coleman purchased what is now the Idea Foundry, and to make that the Idea Foundry, that was previously owned by 80 Farrow Harley Davidson, and they would store all their bike inventory in that building. They wanted to sell it because they wanted to expand their building on Broad Street so that all their inventory would be in one building. Because if it was raining and somebody was there to pick up their new motorcycle, they didn't want to, it was just kind of a big mess. So anyway, so those two things, like the 400 West Rich, and then you had Land Grant, you had Rehab Tavern. Well, Rehab Tavern was first, then Land Grant, Idea Foundry, all kind of at the same time. That's what really kind of like started us on this trajectory that we see today. And my goal always was that all of this momentum that's about to happen in East Franklinton, my job is to just make sure it pushes west. And so, we could say that, we're seeing real examples of that today.
And there's a couple things I think, there is other efforts I feel outside of, um, the work that are also helping push that. There's the rezoning of Columbus. I know that there is, LinkUS just passed. I know that does something pretty big for Broad, right along here. Yeah, it's huge. Talk to how those initiatives play into the work the Board of Trade is doing, but just Franklinton in general.
Yeah, so Zone-In and LinkUS really kind of like, I kind of consider it as they sort of depend on each other, because LinkUS is all about bringing bus rapid transit to a really busy corridor, that passes through underserved, economically challenged neighborhoods, Hilltop and Franklinton, so that those people can get to job centers. Well, what also is expected from that effort is that it's going to allow the necessary density to be established on those corridors, that will allow for all of the retail that is sorely needed in this community, to make residential living truly walkable, truly convenient, and has examples of all the different needs that someone would have, like the bakery and the nail salon and the flower shop. And we have a few coffee shops now, but there's always room for another coffee shop, in my opinion. But all of those different things that you would expect the most mature neighborhood in Central Ohio to have, that left because of all the disinvestment, after the FEMA designation. So uh, Zone-In, what that's going to allow for is the approval to go high enough on Broad Street construction to create retail on the bottom, and then 4 or 5 stories of apartments and or condos on top. So as it relates to the Board of Trade, both of those sound wonderful to us. We want all of that retail. We want all of those missing teeth on Broad Street to be populated and in an active use, in a productive use for the community. We want that, more efficient transportation. I mean, I would love to be able to just, eventually ditch my car, 100%. We're such a car-centric society, and, I'm old enough that I love driving cars. But, over time, as I get a little older, I think, I don't I don't really think I want a car anymore if I could avoid having one. So these are all developments and plans that make me excited, from a convenience point of view, But I also believe that these are developments and plans that should be making, that hopefully are making people excited who just otherwise don't have other options that are efficient and I guess reliable. That's another factor of LinkUS, is that it's all about making bus service more reliable and on time. So if we can get those folks to jobs so that they can come back home to Franklinton and buy things from the store that came up because LinkUS is there and Zone-In allowed for it, that's it. That's what we want.
Yeah, you talk about bringing things into the community, like, with those. One of the things I always hear, and I know we've talked about this before, is every grocery store. I just love, like, a, Kroger, Giant Eagle, fill in the blank with grocery store. But there's a lot that goes into that. I'd love to have you talk about that.
Yeah, when I started the job in January 2010, that was always one of the hottest topics, and it still is today, for the neighborhood's wants and desires, is a grocery store. And there was a lot of just sort of like standing around, with our hands on our hips going, well, why won't they come here? And so we went through a process in 2000. I believe it started in 13 because I'm pretty sure the plan was adopted in 2014, if I have my dates correct. But the West Franklinton plan talked about what does the community want to be and what do we need the most. And obviously we had spent a lot of time talking about a grocery store and trying to debate why won't they do this, why won't they do that, why is no one interested. So we actually, I really enjoyed and appreciated what the consultant did, because we actually just did it. It reminded me of like junior high school math, where you're doing a word problem. Like, train leaves Chicago, yeah. And so we had to back into that. They walked us through basically just backing into the math of, you have this many households. This is the average income of those households. This is this is how much purchasing power those households have. And this is what a grocery needs in purchasing power in households to be relevant and viable in a community.
And that equation didn't add up.
And it did not. No, there was no equal sign there. It just didn't add up. So, so at the very minimum, it wasn't the answer we wanted, but it was an explanation that made sense.
And an objective marker, I feel, for the community.
Yeah. So it's like, okay, so the answer is we need, this many more households with this kind of buying power, which then kind of gets us into that conversation about the word gentrification and the danger of development pushing people out of the neighborhood that don't want to be pushed out. And it's like, I understand that, and we are very sensitive to that, and that is always a top priority when we talk to developers or look at what a new development could be, or what this lot could be, or that lot could be. But we need that mix of income, because without that mix of income and that buying power, we don't get a grocery store. And so one phrase that I always use a lot is, come to the neighborhood with the right set of expectations. And that goes for the higher income folks and the middle income folks who are considering moving here. It's like, don't think you're going to move here and that all of these poor people and problems are going to go away. You're going to coexist with these low income folks and these problems, and you're going to be part of the solution. So that's what I mean when I say come here with the right set of expectations. And a major part of them being part of the solution is that they create that uptick in buying power that would make an Aldi or a Kroger or a Giant Eagle decide that, yeah, this makes sense for us now. Now, the other thing I'll touch on real quick, since I'm on the topic, is that, we do have an Aldi on Mound Street. And for me with a car, that's super convenient. But when you look at the majority, I shouldn't say the word majority. There are a lot of households in the neighborhood who don't have that luxury and would have to walk there or take a bus there. And I always use the example of, if you're a mom, you've got 3 little kids in tow, and you're walking to Aldi, you're crossing Mound Street, which is a really dangerous street to cross. That's a really dangerous intersection right where Aldi is. It's heavily traveled. There's interstate interchanges there. I mean, it's just dangerous, even if you're an able-bodied adult by yourself. But you think of the scenario of, like, you got kids, you get to Aldi, you get all your stuff. Now you got a handful of groceries, and now you're trying to cross back over with those same little kids. And it's just a dangerous situation. People do it. Um, it's, I'm thankful that there have been no, serious situations that have arisen from that scenario. But that's what it validates the argument that we need a grocery store in the neighborhood for those people who depend on their feet to get where they need to go and who have other people that have to depend on them to get there. So, that's the goal, is that we have one in the community that's really sort of central to the community, um, that would be easy for East Franklinton and West Franklinton to get to.
Yeah, I love that. And you brought up another point that I'd love to touch on. Um, I I am such a proponent of building the resources a community needs, bringing people in and helping the community thrive. But one of the things that, some places don't do well, that you talked about is like consciously building, right? Coming in with that set of expectations that you are part of the solution. You're coexisting with these people, who might have been homeless. How can you contribute to help the community be better? What are some examples of how that looks in practice in the community?
Yeah, so, there is a lot of talk with, new residents, like, you reached out and, Derek Bergman reached out and, different people, and I love that. But, it can be as simple as just picking up the trash in front of your house, just tidying up, your section of the alley. I always use the example that if everybody did just enough around their house, it would look really good, in a massive way. And then taking that one step further to like, hey, if you're cutting your grass and your neighbor's grass is not that big, cut, go
Reach
ahead
out
and
to
cut,
them. Yeah.
you just say, hey, I'm doing this anyway. I'll cut your grass for you if that's okay. Those types of things. Um, Being part of community events, National Night Out is one of the best examples, that I can give on the way, that new folks can really, kind of become part of the community, meet the community, and, understand what resources and programs exist in the community that they can then support and be part of. Um, but National Night Out is always the first Tuesday in August. It's a nationwide event. Um, Franklinton actually has one of the largest versions of that event in the Columbus area. I think we typically compete with the Hilltop, as far as what year each one of us has the biggest one. But it's, like 600 people from the community that come out. It's all free. It's just that nice mix of new residents, existing residents, legacy residents that all show up. And I think that's a really important part of people understanding what it is they can do. Because I could give them a long laundry list of things to do, and it all requires, something like picking up trash and like, things like that, things that I'm interested in. But I think there's also a factor of, just having a conversation with your neighbor, being willing to just understand that, okay, yes, they have a broken down washer on their front porch. Okay, it's not the end of the world. It just isn't. So again, getting back to that, I harp on it a lot, but having that right set of expectations.
So I'd love to talk about what are some things you're excited about, looking forward now. We talked a lot about the history of Franklinton, the current state of it, but like looking ahead, what excites you?
Yeah, well, we already touched on LinkUS and Zone-In. Those, especially LinkUS, that really, I have a lot of optimism about that. One of the reasons I have optimism about it is because of a problem that we've been trying to solve ever since I started here, and that's speed on West Broad Street. I mean, we have had so many examples of cars just going way too fast. I mean, just literally reckless driving. They've crashed into Roosevelt Coffee House, they've crashed into Taft's, they've crashed into Restaurant Equippers, they've crashed into Franklinton Cycle Works at least twice.
I feel like
Um,
Frogger whenever I go to Tommy's, because I cross the street and it's just it feels like Frogger.
It's crazy, and, so that is a real issue I mean, that is a 30-mile-an-hour posted speed limit on that Broad Street corridor stretch, and you don't find anybody regularly going less than 50 miles an hour. But then you have those examples of people just like really tearing down the street, you know, literally hitting 70, 80 miles an hour. And it's like just really terrifying. So LinkUS will bring the elements of design to Broad Street that will just basically force slower driving. And I'm excited, really excited about that. Um, but other things I'm excited about, you know, evolution is just part of what a neighborhood has going on for it. And so there is some new ownership for Gravity 2 and for the Idea Foundry with, you know, ownership that I'm familiar with, that I have a lot of respect for, that I think are going to do really amazing things. Um, of course, Gravity 1, you know, Brett Kaufman and his group, I mean, still doing their thing. More to come with that. But the fact that that's sort of broken up now with like other entities now, like looking at it from their perspective, thinking, well, what would I do here, and what kind of tenants would I bring in? I think that's an exciting thing to see happen. It's really exciting that even though Lance Robbins, the developer I mentioned earlier, for the idea for 400 West Ridge, even though he passed away at that time, when he did pass away, there was some fear that, oh, wow, so this whole like art community vibe that he was so into, you know, what if that goes away now with, you know, new investors or new ownership or whatever? And there's been assurances that that will not be the case, that there is going to be a refocusing on what made 400 West Ridge Street successful, and making sure that that is, you know, that remains part of the vibe in the community, part of the ecosystem. And then another thing I'm excited about is that Milo's Catering. This happened sort of late last year or mid last year, but they are now in charge of all the events coordination and catering coordination for strong water events.
Incredible.
So a local business that is now in charge of all of the activities there, that will bring, you know, the right Franklinton flair to what they do. They get the neighborhood. They've been supportive of the Board of Trade for a long, long time. The Pappas family is absolutely amazing. Um, and so those are a couple of like really specific things that I'm excited about, um, as far as just different people being in charge of different things. Um, I'm excited that the Franklinton Arts District now has like a new dedicated executive director. They began a few years ago with Johnny Riddle. He left, and then there was um, a pause in leadership as they kind of regrouped and figure out what they were going to do next. Now they have Travis Haywisher as the executive director. A young lady named Liz Kirkpatrick is their events programming specialist. Um, and one thing that I get to do is I get to introduce those guys to like the new ownership at Gravity 2. And I get to introduce that concept of the Franklinton Arts District to other businesses that move in, you know, west of 315, and maybe aren't quite as familiar with what's going on in the East Franklinton portion of the neighborhood. So just having all those, just that movement, I think that's all healthy movement, to bring different perspectives and different ideas into the area, that will sort of like revive, refresh, rejuvenate the energy that was already there. We're just, you know, I just see it as a doubling down on that energy. That again, my responsibility then is to just make sure that that energy moves west.
Anything exciting coming up with the Board of Trade?
Well, we just went through the renewal process for the Franklinton Special Improvement District. So again, that program, the SID employs full-time cleaning ambassadors, full-time safety ambassadors. Um, Examples of that with the cleaning ambassadors is what we already talked about: picking up trash, legally dumped tires, you know, trimming trees, you know, cutting down weeds, you know, making sure that sidewalks and parking spaces all stay clear and accessible. And then the safety ambassadors, they do everything from just like, you know, proactive patrols to helping businesses that want to have somebody trespass off their property because they're causing a problem. to just wellness checks, like checking in on River and Rich, checking in on Gravity, checking in on Ohio Health Urgent Care. Everything good here? Anybody need anything? Um, if a business has a client that's there for whatever service that they're offering, and it's dark and they're walking back to their car and they feel a little uneasy about it, they can call our guys and they'll come down and they'll just make sure that they get to the car safely. Different things like that. I'm excited that we made it through the first 5 years with great success, and that success was what allowed us to get everyone to re-sign a petition to do it for another 5 years. Super proud of that. Yeah, I kind of can't emphasize that enough, how happy that makes me that we proved we put the proof in the pudding, and people said that, yeah, we want this again. So that's something I'm really excited about. That will allow that program will then grow when it kind of reauthorizes in 2026. The other thing I'm excited about is the Board of Trade just recently entered into an arrangement with the city of Columbus, that the Board of Trade has hired a consultant to do what we're calling a public realm action plan, which will take the lists of capital improvement projects that the neighborhood has wanted and needed for sometimes decades. Very unsexy projects like, sidewalks and lighting and crosswalks and, paying attention to the alleyways. Another topic that will be discussed will be, the lack of tree canopy in critical areas in the neighborhood. And then there will also be a certain amount of that conversation dedicated to placemaking and, public art. Think of like the Franklinton sign at the 315 exit off onto Broad Street. The big letter sign. Doing something to make that, give that some new life.
Some oomph. Yeah,
Yeah,
stand out.
maybe hardscape it instead of having the landscape, so that we're not always battling weeds and all types of things like that. That we make it something just a little different. That's an important thing because I would argue that a sidewalk is more important, but that is important because that is a true gateway to the community. I mean, if you're arriving in Franklinton and you're coming off of 315 South, well, you know, that's the first thing that you might see when you come into the community. So there's an interest for us to make that look attractive. But really the bulk of the attention and the bulk of what I want to see happen out of this are those things where we have a sidewalk where there wasn't currently one, and that we have better lighting in areas where maybe it's a pathway for a child to walk to school, and maybe it's just not lit up enough and it's just not safe for them. Those are the types of things that I want to see this effort address. And the Board of Trade is not going to be the decision makers. I am not the decision maker. We are just the conduit that brings the opportunity to the neighborhood. And so it will be based on advisory groups and working group committees and stakeholder interviews, and the community voices will drive those decisions as far as what gets priority, and what moves up the list as far as like what's going to get done first. Not nearly everything will get done, and I always caution people that this is not a fix everything situation. This is a how much can we fix and how quick can we do it situation.
And if not, it still brings to light that this is something that could be the next phase.
No matter
So,
what,
yeah,
when new funding's available, we want that to happen next. Yeah.
great. Anything else before my last question for you? Floor is yours.
Well, I just got to say that I appreciate folks like you and your wife moving into the community and, taking on an old house. It's a beautiful place. I know you've done a lot of work to it already, and you have more to do. But like, we're doing the interview in the attic. I mean, this is awesome. I love these spaces. I appreciate that you not only do that, but then you reach out to do things like this and try to draw more attention to the programs that we have going on, and nonprofits in the area that are important to support. So advocate, beautify, connect. There's a lot of things that you can put under each of those buckets, and we want to embrace as many of them as we possibly can. that, is within reason. We don't want to take such a big bite we can't chew it all, but at the same time, an analogy I use often in this neighborhood is that we are collectively eating an elephant, and you only do that one bite at a time. And so things like this, more people moving in, and just LinkUS, Zone-In, the Special Improvement District, the Arts District, all those things are really that's the recipe that makes Franklinton what it is and makes it cool and makes people want to be here. So I'll leave you with that before your last question, and happy to have conversations. Anybody that might hear this interview, hit me up.
You're easy to get
I'll
out.
take you to land grant too. So yeah.
And it ties in well to my last question, whether it's to get a bite to eat, whether it's to get a drink, or just to go hang out, a hidden gem of yours that you love in Columbus.
Yeah. So I'll start with this. Franklinton, I said earlier in earlier comments that we often take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. One of the things that we did lose in Franklinton, is we lost some really cool places to eat. There used to be Phillips Original Coney Island. That's where Gravity is now. Originally, that was going to be part of the new Gravity, but for many, many reasons, that didn't work out. I don't know what it was, at the end of the day, but it didn't work out. We lost the Florentine. We lost Columbini Sports Bar, and we lost Strongwater. But there is sun on the horizon there that's going to be a restaurant again in the near future. So we'll get that back. But what I would say is that what we have here today in Franklinton that would be go-tos for sure would be Tommy's Diner. If you've never been to Tommy's Diner, that is something you need to treat yourself to. Um, uh, Yellow Brick Pizza is one of my favorite new pizza shops now. Right there on Rich Street in Franklinton. Of course, Land Grant has food trucks. Their Street Time food truck that is headquartered here in Franklinton. Alex and his wife Lauren live in the community. They have their prep kitchen right on Cypress Avenue. Street Time is a fabulous gourmet hamburger truck with also fabulous fair style fries. One Line Coffee, they have a great selection of things to eat, and great coffee and drinks. Bottoms Up coffee shop. Lots, lots of small places that probably are not high on radars that people should check out. And Soda Go recently opened. I guess they've been there about a year now in the Gravity 2 complex on Broad Street. But they're kind of tucked back in there. A little hard to see from Broad Street. Not a ton of foot traffic right now, except for the people that actually live in that immediate area. But still, I mean, So Plated is a great restaurant on Lane Avenue in Upper Arlington. And so this Soda Go concept is just an extension of that. So we have great options here now, but what we need more of are restaurants. And the last thing I would say is that if your interest is the best Italian sub, or at least equaling the best Italian sub you've ever had, the Patio Bar is at 945 Sullivan Avenue. And if you and I've said many times I never shy away from the challenges of the neighborhood. So I'll just say this because it's real. If you looked at where that is on a map, you might say to yourself, why in the world would I go to that bar? But what I'm telling you, and I know that you can speak to this as well because I made you a believer.
You did.
It is one of the best community bars that you'll ever walk into. And even though they don't have a kitchen and they don't have a patio, it's called the Patio, and they have the equaling the best Italian sub you've ever had in your life. So those are my hot picks for Franklinton, and I hope that if we revisit this conversation in a year or two, that I have 11 more to put on that list because we've had that much more development in the neighborhood.
I look forward to having that conversation then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Trent.
Thank you very much.